and thank you for joining us here on Eye on the Election. I'm Brad Edwards.
And I'm Irika Sargent. Hard to believe, but we are already less than a month away from the November election, and many key races in Illinois and on the national level heating up, of course.
That they are. Last week, we got to see the first debate between Governor J.B. Pritzker and GOP challenger Darren Bailey. We'll get to that shortly, but there are also some interesting races throughout the country that we wanted to get an insider's point of view on.
So joining us now, Professor of Political Science at North Central College, Suzanne Chod. Professor, thank you for joining us. So I could tick off here a lot of different states where so much is going on that we want to talk to you about. Arizona, Nevada, Michigan. I want to first speak about Georgia, though, because a lot of developments with the two candidates there, Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. And we know that just within the last several days, there's been controversy regarding his stance on abortion versus what he historically did, potentially, when it came to some of the partners in his life. But take us through what you think could be happening in the coming days when it comes to that particular Senate race.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for having me on to discuss some of the intricacies of the national level and a little bit closer to home. Georgia is always interesting for lots of reasons, and I'll start with the fact that Georgia has a runoff system. So for their statewide races, if a candidate does not reach 50% of the vote, then the top two vote getters will go to a runoff election. And so right now, the projections look like Senator Warnock is unlikely to hit 50%. I'll say right now, that might change as we get closer. But the institutions itself that elect people in Georgia just sort of change the complexion of a race. And so what that tells us is a couple of things. One is that right now, even though Raphael Warnock is likely to win the race, that he may have to run twice, which is what we've already seen in Georgia a few times before. One of the other interesting things about this particular race is that we've got an incumbent who's barely been in office, having been elevated recently, running against someone who's never had political experience before. Senator Warnock didn't have any political experience before that. So we have sort of relative newcomers, both Black men running. So there's interesting things about the way the race is structured. In terms of what we might see as we get closer to the race, usually what happens with any of these races is that as we get closer, registered Republicans, registered Democrats, those who are likely to vote, if they haven't been answering poll questions or they haven't said they've decided, they come right back home. We say partisans come home, and they vote for their party, regardless of anything else. And so while this race may look to tighten a bit, it's unlikely that we're going to see Herschel Walker win this first round or win a majority.
Professor, let's go to the Buckeye State, Ohio. It's got an open Senate seat right now, and the Democrat, Tim Ryan, turned in a lively performance. He's polling really well, somewhat surprisingly. And in an interesting move, he's basically told the Democratic apparatus and the president, stay away. I don't want you coming here. I don't want you showing your face in Ohio. I want to do this on my own.
That's right.
Pretty stunning considering the Democrats pretty much run the table right now, is it not?
You know, I will say I'm from the Buckeye State, so sometimes I don't even understand what goes on in my home state politically. There's a lot of stuff in Ohio that's fascinating right now, and some of it is where we've seen Ohio go. It's no longer a swing state. Ohio is a secure red state. And so for Tim Ryan to be competitive when the current governor is Republican who's likely to win, and I think part of the reason Tim Ryan is competitive is because he has some national name recognition, but he sees the writing on the wall, I think, with the direction the Democratic Party needs to go, and he thinks he can get some traction in Ohio if he distances himself from Biden, where he's not particularly popular, and thinks he can get an edge over Vance in that way because he's so well known, politically at least well known. It's really close right now, and if we look at national trends, it looks like Vance could take it, but because of fundraising and to your point before about Ryan's lively performance, I like that term you used, and what he's talking about with distancing himself from Biden, it should get closer as we get closer to the election.
Suzanne, yes, Professor Suzanne Chod, if we could go to Pennsylvania now. I felt so informal now. I feel like we're on a first-name basis. That's what it is.
And we won't hold the Buckeye thing against you.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Pennsylvania, we just saw, or at least I saw this interview happening just within the last couple of days with Fetterman sitting down and being pretty forthcoming about some of the implications from his health issues. And there's been a lot of mudslinging from both sides. Dr. Oz speaking about it in what some might consider a crass way, saying that if he had eaten a single vegetable, maybe he wouldn't even be in that position. Some really harsh words coming out of that race. But what are your thoughts on what's going to happen going into November?
Yeah. I would start by, and I appreciate what you brought up to begin with about the way that Dr. Oz has been speaking about Fetterman's health, is that some of the language he's using, and as a medical professional, is not only problematic, but it's also very ableist. And so I think that we should be aware of this language that is othering and in some ways quite dehumanizing to someone who experienced a medical event. And I appreciate that Fetterman has been open, and I think that this is important for him to do so, because this is, he's on the cusp of most likely becoming the next senator in Pennsylvania. The forecasts are very clear right now that Fetterman is a clear favorite. It's very unlikely that Dr. Oz, even with his fundraising, is going to get close. And attacking Fetterman's health and using ableist language is not the way to get in with voters and try to sort of overcome the obstacles he has to winning.
Professor, you are, and don't take this as a pejorative, you are a political wonk at North Central College, multiple degrees. So I know, your finger is on the pulse. Are you pulling any strands out of, recent reports coming out or, signals from polling that you can maybe read some tea leaves like, hey, this thing might lean left November, it might lean right? Are you seeing anything yet?
Oh, I like it. I wish it were as easy as tea leaves, but we've got these very elaborate forecasts that we use with polling and previous voting history and all of that. And I rely on colleagues heavily who do that statistical work. And so what we're seeing right now is it is likely, although slimly likely, that the Democrats will retain the Senate, just based on the open seat races and those who are also likely to win re-election. So it looks like, although slightly, the Democrats will retain the Senate. But on the other side of it, again, based on what we're seeing from the polling and from the fundamentals we know that dictate elections, and just the historical pattern that the president's party loses seats in a midterm, it's very likely, if not more likely than the Senate, that the Republicans will take the House. And so come January, we will most likely have a Democrat in the White House, we'll have Speaker Kevin McCarthy in the House, and then we'll have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, which makes things even more complicated than they already are, and especially as we then look real far ahead to 2024.
Yeah. Speaking about all of that, if you could continue to forecast the Supreme Court, the makeup there, especially with some of these key issues like abortion right now, of course, polarizing the country, what do you think will happen there?
There are a number of cases the court has already heard or is agreeing to hear. For example, just in the last couple of weeks, we've heard cases about the Voting Rights Act in terms of redistricting. We're going to be hearing other cases. The court just rejected, in fact, hearing a case to determine fetal personhood. It's unlikely that's the last time that will come. And so the court is seen as sort of friendlier now to the conservative cause, which was decades in the making to get it there. And if the House is controlled by Republicans and we see the split within the legislative branch, then we're going to see one agenda coming from the House, another agenda coming from the Senate, which makes the court even more important, because if the legislature is not going to do something, if President Biden is going to write executive orders, they may get challenged to the court. It gets, and I don't mean messy in sort of the traditional sense, but politically messy and legislatively messy if we see this outcome, but it's likely we will.
Professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College. Professor, we thank you for your time, and we expect we're probably going to be hearing a lot more from you in the coming weeks. We really do appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you both so much. I look forward to talking to you again.
Now, shifting local to Illinois politics, back with us today, two of our favorite political insiders and friends of the stream, Kimberley Egonmwan, host at WVON, lawyer, and of course a friend of the stream. We
also have former chair of the Illinois Republican Party and former state and federal prosecutor, Pat Brady. So first off, you two, we are here previewing the governor's race. That was happening last week, and we want to step right back into that. I know I was seeing some new ads coming out from both sides. So if you would first, let's start with you, Pat. If you could weigh in here when we talk about the fact that they had their first debate last week, your thoughts on how Darren Bailey did and where we stand with these two candidates.
I thought insofar as the debate, it was less that what Darren Bailey did, but more what the governor didn't do. I've said all along that he's actually a pretty good debater and a pretty good guy with the message and a friendly guy just to talk to and know, but he did not bring his A game to that debate. He got into it with Bailey. My view is he punched down. He started immediately calling Bailey a liar. You're up 15 points, you don't need to do that. So I think the governor had a bad night. Darren Bailey actually, I think, had a pretty good night, considering what he needed to accomplish in that debate by calling the governor out on certain things. But he still lacks specifics on what he wants to do if he's governor. And I think that will be the main topic as we roll into this next debate.
Yeah, I think the consensus is, Pat, that Darren Bailey did at least better than expected. Kimberley, want to bring you into this conversation. This is a no judgment zone, so I will admit I was on the treadmill today. I was listening to Pandora, and every single ad was a Pritzker ad, and it was his stance on abortion, being pro-life. This is, of course, not anything that he could even legislate, but I think it speaks to a moment in time that we're in. Is that message, singularly, that we see hitting all over the country, is that going to resonate?
Well, I think that in this particular race, the fact that the Supreme Court decided now to make that decision, it does bode well for the governor because we know him to be a very pro-choice politician. The one thing that I would say is that when you're watching that debate, if you were for Pritzker, I think that you walked away, you were still for Pritzker. If you were for Darren Bailey, I think you breathe a sigh of relief to say he didn't mess up, and you probably still would be for him. For the people who are undecided, it's an issue like this that will probably make their decision for them, especially if they are pro-choice. And I think that is why you're going to see from Governor Pritzker, he is going to really rely on the female vote, the liberal, and I would say white female vote as well, to try and bring him home this win in that way. I mean, the topic, the Supreme Court gave him a gift with that ruling. So as a politician, of course, he's going to use that.
Well, Kimberley, while Bailey is focusing on crime, this is the sort of the parallel between the current governor focusing on abortion here. But what do you think this means for undecideds, those out there who, really walking in a little less than a month out, haven't made up their mind?
Well, I think that if going back to the debate again, which was a very interesting debate, if you're someone who's undecided, it just depends on what your leanings are. Darren Bailey went in pretty strong against unions. That was very interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's, his calling sign for people who would be, right to work states or whatever they want to have. That would be his crowd. His crowd would also be pro-life. We know that he's very pro-life in every instance. Governor Pritzker, of course, if we're talking about these larger issues, he is definitely going to go with the pro-choice. He wants to also stand on his record, the record that he has named off several things. He had a very ambitious legislative agenda when he became governor pre-COVID. And then during COVID, most would say that he did a good job of ensuring that the citizens of Illinois had fewer deaths than other states, especially our neighboring states, and that he took care of that issue. So I think that the independent, it just depends on their leanings, definitely. Now, when we're talking about this crime thing, that has been an issue in African-American communities for decades. All of a sudden, it has become an issue for other communities, which is very interesting. We'll be talking about that on our show next week. But those people are going to want to hear something, and I don't know if it's going to work where you're just constantly saying the governor's at fault, and tying in Lori Lightfoot, right? But really, to this minute, Darren Bailey really has not given any solutions. He's just blamed the other guy.
Yeah, I think one question now that could be asked, and Darren Bailey could just ask and ask and ask again, is do you feel safer now than you did 4 years ago? Just a simple question like that. Brady, what do you think most people would answer to that, Patrick? And also, are there any undecideds left this late in the game?
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with Kimberley. I think he kind of put it into two buckets. There's not really a whole lot of undecideds left. I mean, 7 or 8% in the last polls I've seen. So a lot of voters have already decided. So it kind of turns on who's motivated to show up to vote. And are you motivated by crime and inflation? And that typically would be the Republicans or the more conservative leaning voters. Are you motivated by abortion and Donald Trump, which would tend to be the more left leaning voters? The one thing I'm kind of trying to figure out, and I haven't been able to figure out yet, is who's the most motivated to vote, because all that matters on election day is who shows up to vote. And the polls have been inaccurate for probably the last 15 years on guessing who's actually going to show up to vote. So, but I do agree, those are the two buckets of issues that people are going to come to the polls on. But the big question is, who's going to show up? Does Darren Bailey have a huge uphill climb? Absolutely, because he's so far to the right, and just the trend of the state is going towards the Democrats. But the first 12 minutes of that debate, I believe that J.B. Pritzker gave, maybe not Darren Bailey, but other Republicans, a lifeline in that he just could not answer questions about the quote unquote Safety Act, which is very unpopular. And just anecdotally from the people I talked to that are actually out walking door to door, is a top of mind issue in suburban Cook and the collars. Now, Kimberley makes a good point on the issue. And this is super complicated. Kimberley knows it better than anybody. Crime's been an issue. I remember when I started in the prosecutor's office 35 years ago, we had more murders than we do now. But the reality is that, or the kind of the impetus of the Safety Act was making a crime reform bill that more aligns with what's going on in some of the minority communities. There's been some bad conduct and some things that we can't have happen again. And I think that's what the governor and the Democrats were trying to address in that bill. Now, maybe they went a little bit overboard, but this is not just a lock them up, tough on crime bill. This is a more encompassing bill. At least they try to do that. But the Republicans, whether they agree with them or not, and there's a lot of disinformation, have effectively portrayed the Safety Act as a soft on crime bill. And that doesn't play well in any community.
I want to go back to commercials. I know I teased this earlier, but Brad, you know, we're not shocked when we see journalists in ads. Usually it's because, of course, they are taking little snippets from a lot of our newscasts. But right now, the second ad has come out with the previous political journalist who was at one of the major stations here. And I just want to get both of your thoughts on really the strategy that they're using when you see these ads in the language. The latest, well, the first one I know has been playing for more than a week now about how he's just a farmer. And
I think he's
Bailey.
a farmer 4 times.
4 or 5 times.
Southern
Hey, I'm the
farmer.
only guy on this panel, I guarantee, that's actually detasseled corn and walked beans. So I'm a farmer too.
And so
That qualifies you then. You should.
Okay. Well,
Or
you might
Kimberly,
have
whatever
some,
you want to call me.
you might have some special insight there. This second one, though, focusing on Pritzker, though. So, all right, Pat, you were talking about this. Tell me your thoughts on if you think that the bare bones of these ads, the language of these ads, is really going to resonate with anyone, or is it really, like, I'm hearing a lot of, like, can you believe this got on the air in its simplest form?
Well, the one with the journalist is interesting. I mean, we all know who he is, and I love him. I was shocked when I saw that one come on. So it'll be interesting to have a conversation with him after the election, because I had many friendly battles with him when I was Republican Party chairman. But he's a good man. You know, people can do what they want. I never want to speak to the African-American community, but I don't know if that's effective or not. Charles is a big name and a great guy, and maybe it does. I don't know.
think
Is
we're
that
going to
going
name him. We're not
to
naming him.
persuade voters to come over and vote for Darren Bailey because Charles Thomas says so? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's effective.
Kimberley, especially seeing that second ad, if you could sort of describe it and give an idea for Pat what that second one was about when it was focusing on Pritzker and what your thoughts are.
Well, first you have to get over the shock of the person who's doing the ad. And it's so interesting. I was watching one of the other stations last night, and journalists were talking about the commercial. And it's almost as though Mr. Thomas killed Christmas for them. They were just so let down by the fact that a journalist crossed over to do that, you know. So that was interesting in and of itself. Secondly,
You saw the number, right, Kimberly? What
I'm sorry?
it cost?
He
You
got
saw
paid-
the
he
number,
got
what it
paid
cost.
$50,000.
I would have done it for
$50,000.
less, but that.
Yeah. No, you would have done okay.
I'd have done for
You know,
10.
considering the way in which it is playing right now, almost unanimously, people who are calling our show and the people that I talk to it feels almost like, and you all will be familiar with this, those old Saturday Night Live commercials. You're waiting for the laugh track at the end,
Right.
because there's just, he's a farmer. Yeah, he's a farmer. You know, it's just nothing to it. Now, the second one, it looks like that would have been the one they would have tried to push more and promote more, because it actually does talk a little bit about the opponent's record, and it talks a little bit more about that. He goes a little harder in that. But as I said before, we have seen commercials really backfire, especially when they are geared toward the African-American community, in the way in which this one was. And I'm thinking back to when former Governor Pat Quinn ran against Dan Hines in the primary. And Dan Hines had the misfortune of listening to whatever consultant told him to bring out the sainted Mayor Harold Washington, speaking from the grave almost, to talk about how Pat Quinn was the worst person he had ever seen. He shouldn't be in charge of anything. And they thought that that was going to play well because it was someone who was respected by the community. And it completely, they probably were close in that race at that point. It completely backfired. I don't know that this catches fire at all.
Yeah, it's a super risky. You're angering every journalist in the city. What's the effect of it? Because again, they know him like Charles Thomas, but the first ad to me is like, this might be the dumbest ad I've ever seen, just the content of it. And again, I love Charles, but it didn't make any sense to me either. But those guys, the prof pack, the people who play by the rules, ironically, they don't play by the rules. They're putting all these ads out. It's controversial ads, that's what they do. Remember what they do with Jeannie Ives when she ran 4 years ago? They put out that racist, homophobic ad. That only aired for, well, I guess they kept it up, but it probably cost Jeannie Ives the primary, but they created the stir that they want. A lot of these consultants aren't necessarily concerned with winning. They're just concerned with getting paid and creating a stir.
Yeah, interesting insight from Pat. We also have to now add to his moniker, former federal prosecutor, former head of the Republican Party, and former farmer, or once a farmer, always a farmer, Pat.
Hey, once you're a farmer, you're always a farmer. I'm telling you guys, I get out there to tassel corn. That'll make you tough.
We will take you up on that 1 year. Now let's go to the Supreme Court. This is really critical. The Illinois Supreme Court. Right now it is 4-3. Balance of power belongs to the Democrats. It's been in Democrat control by the Democratic Party for decades. But 2 seats are open. It could actually turn, something no one thought they would ever see here. And they ultimately will make the laws, the final decision on laws in Illinois. That's where abortion does come in. Kimberley, your thought on just how important that race is, and juxtapose it with, do people even know or care or get involved in it or think about it?
So that's the key, Brad. That is the key. It is extremely important because it is the highest court of the land. It's the final decision maker. However, when we're talking about judges and the way that they are chosen in the state of Illinois, city of Chicago, county of Cook, however you want to put it, there is not enough emphasis placed on, like, we've got lots of commercials, don't get me wrong, but there is not enough emphasis placed on how important these races are. And most people, Pat, you may have a poll on this, I don't know, but most people literally skip over all of the judicial races. And that's
except the Irish names.
Except, right, if you have an Irish name.
You get 60,000 votes for having an Irish name.
And going, and I would be like slated for a position right away.
But I could get 80,000 votes with my name.
So, but you see what I'm saying? I think
I agree completely.
And most people, they don't vote for retention. They don't vote to put someone in. I don't know that they're going, unless you are really steeped into this moment, which could bode well for conservatives, because this will be the first time in some time that they will be able to change the court. If you're not steeped well into the politics of this, I think a lot of people are going to bypass the people who show up, because we're still not talking about the extremely low voter turnout rate during midterms, but the people who show up usually bypass all of the judicial races.
I agree completely with Kimberly. The only thing I would add to that is, so you have Mary Kay O'Brien against Judge Burke in the third, which runs south of Cook and then kind of to the west. Mary Kay O'Brien, the Democratic candidate there, to me, appears to has to actually have an organization, meaning she can actually get her voters to the polls. and she has the support, not directly, but of the big trial lawyers pack. And they've been putting out some pretty brutal ads on Justice Burke on the abortion issue, which I assume is targeted to those suburban female voters you were talking about before. But you go up into the second with Mark Curran and Judge Rochford. I think that race is a little different. Mark Curran was a former sheriff, Democrat turned Republican, ran against Senator Durbin, got crushed, and now he's running for this. And he actually raised like $4 and won the primary. So he was the surprise. So I agree with the import of this, but I also agree, I'm not sure if people pay attention. I mean, if you actually flip the court, that would not only mean changes in the way the pension system's run in the state, likely, it would also mean changes in the laws regarding plaintiffs' lawsuits. It would be a huge change, but I don't think, unless you are like Kimberley and me that live for this stuff, you really understand what's going on in those races. But the hopes of the Republicans to win those seats maybe 8 months ago, I think are slowly but surely diminishing. I'd be really surprised if we get a change in the court.
Two of our best friends in the stream, Pat Brady and Kimberley Egonmwan. We appreciate
I'll wear
it.
bibs next time, buddy. I'll get the whole thing going for you.
Oh, we're holding you to that. All right.
I want the whole 9 yards. I want the scarecrow for Halloween coming up.
Yes, thank you to you both for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time with this Eye on Politics in the election.
Yeah, for Irika
See you,
Sargent.
Kimberly. See you guys. Thanks.
All right.
Take care.
For Irika Sargent, I'm Brad Edwards. It's been Eye on Politics. Thanks for being a friend of the stream. Now back to the stream.